The storm came down like a punishment. Caleb Rourke had seen bad weather before. Everyone who lived this far out had. But this was different. The wind didn't gust. It hammered. The snow didn't fall. It attacked. He'd been out checking the fence line when the sky turned the color of old iron, and by the time he got back to the barn, he could barely see his own hands. He didn't plan on going back out. No one with a brain would. But then his horse threw a shoe. It wasn't dramatic. The mare just stood there in the stall, one hoof cocked, waiting. Caleb swore under his breath, grabbed his coat, and headed out into the white. The spare shoes were in the lean-to on the far side of the property. 10 minutes there, 10 back. Easy. He made it halfway before he saw her. At first he thought it was a deer, something dark against the snow, crumpled and still. He almost kept walking. Then the wind shifted and he saw fabric, torn, heavy, expensive looking, and a hand pale as bone, fingers curled like she'd been reaching for something. Caleb stopped. His first thought was that she was dead. His second thought was that it wasn't his problem. People died out here all the time. The land didn't care about fairness, and neither did the cold. He had his own survival to worry about. But he didn't keep walking. He crouched down beside her, brushing snow off her face. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her skin and lips that had gone past blue into something worse. Her dress, what was left of it, had probably cost more than his cabin. Now it was shredded, stained, and frozen stiff. She wasn't breathing. Caleb pressed 2 fingers to her throat. There. Faint. Barely there. But something. Damn it, he muttered. He didn't think. He just moved. Scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing and started back toward the cabin. The wind tried to shove him sideways. The snow bit at his face. His boot slipped on the ice, and once he went down hard on one knee, jarring them both. She didn't make a sound. By the time he kicked the cabin door open, his lungs were burning and his arms were numb. He laid her out on the floor in front of the stove, started peeling off the frozen layers. The dress was useless, so he cut it away. Underneath, she was bruised, deep, ugly bruises across her ribs, her shoulders, her wrists. Whoever she was, someone had hurt her. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, built up the fire until the cabin was sweltering, and then he waited. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just when he was starting to think he'd dragged a corpse inside, she coughed. It was a horrible sound, wet, choking, desperate. Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, and she tried to sit up. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder, firm but not rough. Easy, he said. You're safe. She didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the rough walls, the low ceiling, the single room that served as kitchen, bedroom, and everything else. She looked at him, and for a second there was something in her eyes that he couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. Then she passed out again. Caleb sat back on his heels, exhaling slowly. What the hell did I just bring home? He said to the empty room. She didn't wake up for 2 days. In that time, Caleb learned a few things. She had scars, old ones, faded but deliberate, like someone had taken their time. She had calluses on her hands, but not the kind you got from work. More like the kind you got from holding reins, or maybe a pen. And she talked in her sleep, low and frantic, words he couldn't make out, but that sounded like pleading. He kept the fire going, changed the blankets when she sweated through them, tried to get water past her lips, a few drops at a time. It wasn't kindness exactly. He just didn't know what else to do. On the 3rd morning, he woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up fast, heart pounding. The stove was going, the kettle was on, and she was standing by the window wrapped in one of his shirts, staring out at the snow. You shouldn't be up, Caleb said. She turned. In the daylight, she looked different, still pale, still bruised, but steady. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. You saved my life, she said. Her voice was low, rough from disuse, but there was something polished underneath it, expensive. Couldn't leave you out there. Most people would have. He didn't argue. It was true. She crossed the room slowly, like her legs weren't quite ready to hold her, and sat down at the table. I don't have anything to pay you with. Didn't ask for payment. Then what do you want? Your name, Caleb said, and how you ended up half dead in the middle of nowhere. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Eliza? Eliza Ward. It wasn't the truth. He could tell that much, but he let it go. And the rest? I was traveling, she said carefully. There was an accident. The coach went off the road. I walked as far as I could, and then she gestured vaguely at the window. The storm. It was a good story. Simple. Believable, if you didn't look too close. Caleb looked close. Where were you traveling to? West. From where? East. He almost smiled. You're not much for details, are you? I'm not much for questions, she said. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee that she'd made better than he ever managed. Outside, the wind had died down, and the snow was starting to thin. In a few days, the pass would be clear. She could leave, if she wanted to. You can stay, Caleb said finally, until you're strong enough to move on. Why? Because you'll die if you don't. Eliza studied him. You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I didn't pull you out of the snow to watch you walk back into it. She didn't thank him, just nodded once, sharp and businesslike, like they'd made a deal. The first week, she mostly slept. The second week, she started moving around. Slowly at first, standing by the window, then walking to the table, then pacing the length of the cabin like she was testing herself. Caleb gave her space. He had work to do anyway. The animals needed feeding, the roof needed patching, and there were a dozen other things that didn't care if he had company or not. But he noticed things. The way she held herself, even when she was weak, straight-backed, proud. The way she watched everything, filing it away. The way she never asked for help, even when she clearly needed it. And the way she flinched sometimes at sounds he didn't even register. A door closing, a branch snapping outside, his own footsteps on the floor. On the 10th day, he came back from the barn to find her scrubbing the floor. You don't have to do that, Caleb said. I need to do something, Eliza said without looking up. I'm not used to sitting still. Neither am I. But I don't clean the floor every day. Clearly. He almost laughed. Fair enough. She sat back on her heels, pushing hair out of her face. You live alone out here? Yeah. By choice? Does it matter? I'm curious. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. I like the quiet. Me too, she said softly. There was something in her voice that made him pause, something that sounded like the truth. What are you running from? He asked. Eliza went still. Then she stood, wringing out the rag with precise, controlled movements. Nothing you need to worry about. If it followed you here, it becomes my worry. It won't. You sure about that? She met his eyes. No. At least she was honest. By the third week, they'd fallen into a routine. Caleb handled the heavy work, cutting wood, tending the animals, fixing whatever broke. Eliza took over the cabin, cooking, cleaning, organizing things he hadn't bothered with in years. She was good at it, efficient and thorough, but it was more than that. She moved through the space like she was used to managing things, big things. He started testing her little by little. You ever work in a kitchen before? He asked one night, watching her dice vegetables with the kind of precision that didn't come from necessity. Not exactly. What's not exactly mean? It means I've watched people work in kitchens. Rich people don't usually watch. She paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. Who said I was rich? Your hands, Caleb said. Your posture. The way you apologized to the chair when you bumped into it yesterday. Eliza set the knife down. You're observant? Out here you have to be. What else have you observed? That you're smart. That you're scared. And that whatever you're running from, you think it's going to find you eventually. She didn't deny it, just picked up the knife and kept cutting. You going to tell me the truth? Caleb asked. Would you believe me if I did? Probably not. Then what's the point? He didn't have an answer for that. The first real crack in her story came a week later. Caleb had ridden into town. Nearest settlement was 15 miles south, barely more than a trading post and a saloon. He went once a month for supplies. No more. People asked fewer questions if you didn't give them the chance. He was loading flour and coffee into his saddlebags when he saw the poster. It was new, nailed to the post outside the saloon. A woman's face, rendered in clean black lines. Dark hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face you didn't forget. Missing, the text read. Elizabeth Charlotte Ashford, reward for information. The amount below it made Caleb's stomach turn. He stared at it for a long time. Then he tore it down, folded it into his coat, and rode home. Eliza was at the table when he walked in, mending one of his shirts. She looked up, started to smile, then stopped when she saw his face. What happened? Caleb pulled out the poster and laid it on the table. She went white. That you? He asked. No. Eliza. My name isn't Eliza, she said quietly. It's Elizabeth, Charlotte Ashford. And before you ask, yes, I lied. Yes, I'm running. And yes, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. Caleb sat down across from her. Who's looking for you? Everyone. That's not an answer. Elizabeth, he couldn't think of her as Eliza anymore, folded the poster, hands shaking. My family's people, and the man they want me to marry. You got a problem with marriage? I have a problem with him. What's his name? She hesitated, then Victor Kane. Caleb knew that name. Everyone did. Kane Industries owned half the railways west of the Mississippi, most of the silver mines in the Rockies, and enough politicians to make laws bend whichever way suited him. Victor Kane wasn't just rich. He was powerful. And you're running from him, Caleb said slowly. I'm running from what he'll do if he catches me. Which is, Elizabeth looked at him, and for the first time since she'd woken up in his cabin, he saw real fear in her eyes. Force me to marry him, take control of my inheritance, and make sure I never leave again. Caleb leaned back in his chair. How much is your inheritance worth? Does it matter? If people are hunting you for it, yeah, it matters. She told him. The number was so large it didn't sound real. Jesus, Caleb muttered. My father built an empire, Elizabeth said quietly. Textiles, shipping, railroads. When he died, he left everything to me. Not my uncles, not the board, me. And Victor's been trying to get his hands on it ever since. By marrying you. By owning me. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face. Why didn't you just say no? I did. That's why I'm here. And the bruises. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Caleb stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the snow. His quiet life, the one he'd built out here, alone, away from people and their problems, was officially over. You should leave, Elizabeth said behind him. Take the reward. Turn me in. It's more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Yeah, Caleb said, it is. So? He turned around. So I'm not turning you in. Why not? Because I don't like men who hurt women, he said simply. And I don't like being told what to do. Elizabeth stared at him. You're insane. Probably. They'll come for you too. Let them. Caleb, you want to leave, leave, he said. But if you stay, we do this my way. No more lies, no more half-truths. You tell me everything and we figure out how to keep you alive. Deal? She looked at him for a long time, then she nodded. Deal. She told him everything that night, how her father had built his fortune from nothing, how he'd refused to hand it over to his brothers who'd expected it, demanded it, felt entitled to it, how he'd left it all to Elizabeth instead, knowing she was the only one smart enough and stubborn enough to hold it together. How Victor Kane had shown up 3 months after the funeral with a marriage proposal that wasn't really a proposal. How she'd said no. How he'd smiled and said he'd ask again. How he'd kept asking, each time with a little more pressure, a little more threat, until it stopped being about marriage and started being about control. How her uncles had sided with him, seeing an opportunity to get what they thought they were owed. How she'd realized too late that she was surrounded. So I ran, Elizabeth said, took what I could carry, hired a coach, and headed west. I thought if I could get far enough away, disappear long enough, they'd give up. They won't, Caleb said. I know. So what's the plan? I don't have one. Then we'll make one. Elizabeth looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Why are you doing this? Caleb thought about it. Because you asked for help. I didn't ask for anything. You didn't have to. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Elizabeth said, "There's something else you should know." "What?" "Victor Kane," she said slowly. "He's not just powerful. He's connected. And one of those connections is a man named Marcus Rourke." Caleb went very still. "What did you say?" "Marcus Rourke. He's Victor's right hand, handles the things Victor doesn't want traced back to him. I thought you should know, in case he's my brother," Caleb finished. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Your half-brother," Caleb corrected. "Same father, different mothers. Haven't seen him in 15 years. Didn't think I ever would again. Caleb, I'm sorry, I didn't. It's fine." He stood up, suddenly needing to move. "Doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Elizabeth said. "If Marcus finds out you're helping me, then I'll deal with Marcus." "You don't understand. He's not—" "I know exactly what he is," Caleb said quietly, "which is why I'm not afraid of him." Elizabeth studied him. "What happened between you two?" "Nothing worth talking about." "Caleb, leave it," he said, sharper than he meant to. Then, softer, "Please." She nodded slowly. The next few weeks were strange. On the surface, nothing changed. Caleb worked. Elizabeth kept the cabin running. They ate together, talked about small things, avoided the big ones. But underneath, something was shifting. He noticed the way she looked at him sometimes, when she thought he wasn't paying attention, like she was trying to figure him out, like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. He noticed the way she laughed at his jokes, rare but real, the way she relaxed bit by bit until she wasn't watching the door every time the wind picked up. He noticed the way she fit into his life, like she'd always been there, and he noticed, with a sinking feeling he couldn't quite shake, that he didn't want her to leave, which was a problem, because sooner or later someone was going to come looking for her, and when they did, his quiet life would turn into a war. He just didn't realize how soon that would be. It started with the horses. Caleb was in the barn one morning mucking out stalls when he heard them. Multiple riders, moving fast. He dropped the pitchfork, grabbed the rifle he kept by the door, and stepped outside. 3 men, well-dressed, well-armed, and riding horses that cost more than his entire property. They pulled up in the yard, and the one in front, a tall man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them, dismounted. "Morning," the man said pleasantly. "Name's Garrett. I'm looking for someone." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "Not here." "You sure about that?" Garrett pulled out a folded piece of paper. The poster. "Woman matching this description was seen in the area a few weeks back. Thought maybe you'd run into her." "Thought wrong." Garrett's smile widened. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "I mind. We could make it worth your while." "Not interested." Garrett sighed like Caleb was being unreasonable. "Look, friend, we're not here to cause trouble. We just want the girl. You help us out, we all walk away happy. And if I don't, then we stop being friendly." Caleb raised the rifle. "Get off my property." For a second, nobody moved. Then Garrett nodded, still smiling. "All right, we'll go. But you should know, my employer is a patient man, but he's not a forgiving one. You're making a mistake. Won't be my first." Garrett swung back into the saddle. "We'll see you soon, Mr. Rourke." They rode off, slow and deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. Caleb watched them go, heart pounding. Then he turned and saw Elizabeth standing in the cabin doorway, white as snow. "They know I'm here," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said. "They do. I have to leave." "No." "Caleb, we're not done yet," he said, walking past her into the cabin. "Not even close, but..." That night they made a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was something. "They'll be back," Elizabeth said, "and next time they won't ask nicely." "I know. So what do we do?" "We make it so you're not worth taking." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Caleb leaned forward. "You said Victor wants your inheritance. That's what this is about, right? Not you, your money." "Yes." "Then we take it away." Elizabeth stared at him. "How?" "You sign it over, all of it, to someone Victor can't touch." "Who?" "Anyone. A charity. A trust. Hell, burn it if you have to. Point is, if you don't have the money, you're not valuable anymore." "That's insane." "You got a better idea?" She didn't. They sat in silence, the fire burning low. Finally, Elizabeth said, "If I do this, if I give it all away, I'll have nothing." "You'll have your life. Is that enough?" Caleb looked at her. "You tell me." She closed her eyes. "I don't know." "Then figure it out," he said quietly, "because they're coming back. And when they do, you need to be ready." They came back 3 days later. This time, there were more of them. 6 riders, armed and ready. Garrett was in front again, but now there was someone else with him, someone Caleb recognized even after 15 years. Marcus Rourke. He looked older, harder. But the eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, and completely empty. "Hello, brother," Marcus said. Caleb didn't answer. Marcus smiled. "I hear you've been harboring a fugitive. I hear you've been working for a coward." "Victor Kane is a lot of things," Marcus said, "but a coward isn't one of them. He sent 6 men to drag 1 woman back. That's cowardice." "Or efficiency." Marcus dismounted, walking closer. "I don't want trouble, Caleb. I'm just here to do a job." "Then you're leaving empty-handed." "We both know that's not how this ends." Caleb raised the rifle. "You want to test that?" Marcus stopped. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Marcus said, "Garrett, check the cabin." Garrett moved toward the door. Caleb fired. The shot rang out loud and sharp, splintering the wood inches from Garrett's boot. The man jumped back, hand going to his gun. "Next one's not a warning," Caleb said. Marcus held up a hand, stopping Garrett. "You always were stubborn, and you were always a sellout." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but I'm the one who's walking away from this alive." "We'll see." Marcus studied him. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll do this the hard way." He turned, heading back to his horse. "Tell Victor something for me," Caleb called after him. Marcus paused. "Tell him she's not his, and she never will be." Marcus looked back, something almost like regret in his eyes. "You always did pick the losing side, Caleb." Then he rode off, and the others followed. Elizabeth stepped out of the cabin, shaking. "That was your brother." "Yeah. He's going to come back." "I know. And next time he won't give you a choice." Caleb lowered the rifle. "Then we'd better be ready." The next 2 weeks were a countdown. They both knew it. Neither of them said it. Caleb reinforced the cabin, barred the windows, stockpiled ammunition, set up traps around the perimeter. Elizabeth helped where she could, but mostly she watched, quiet and tense, like she was waiting for the world to end. At night, they talked. About everything. About nothing. About the life she'd left behind and the one she'd never had. About the reasons he'd come out here in the first place and why he'd never left. About fear and choice and what it meant to be free. "I've never made my own decisions," Elizabeth said one night. "Not real ones. Everything was planned for me, my education, my future, even my marriage." "And now?" "Now I'm terrified," she admitted, "because I don't know what happens next. No one does." "But you're not scared." "I didn't say that." She looked at him. "What are you scared of?" Caleb thought about it. "Losing this." "The cabin?" "This," he said, gesturing between them. "Whatever this is." Elizabeth went still. "I know it's temporary," Caleb continued. "I know you're going to leave eventually, but for the first time in a long time, I don't feel alone, and I'm not ready to give that up." She didn't say anything. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. They sat like that for a long time, in the firelight, holding on. When Marcus came back, he brought an army. Not literally, but close enough. 20 men, all armed, all paid. They surrounded the cabin at dawn, silent and efficient, cutting off every escape route before Caleb even woke up. He knew they were there the second he opened his eyes. Elizabeth was already awake, standing at the window. "They're here!" Caleb grabbed the rifle. "How many?" "Too many." He looked outside. She was right. "Stay inside," he said. "Caleb, stay inside." He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Marcus was waiting, standing in the center of the yard like he owned it. Behind him, the men fanned out, weapons ready but not raised. Yet. "Last chance, brother," Marcus said. "Hand her over, and this ends peacefully." "Not happening." "Then you're choosing to die." Wouldn't be the first time. Marcus sighed. Always the martyr. Better than being a lapdog. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame, but it was gone in a second. You're outgunned, outmanned, and out of options. What exactly is your plan here? To make you work for it. Marcus almost smiled. Fair enough. He raised his hand, and then Elizabeth stepped outside. Wait, she said. Everyone turned. She walked past Caleb down the steps into the yard. Her hands were empty. Her face was calm. I'll go with you, she said. No, Caleb said sharply. Elizabeth didn't look at him. On one condition. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're not in a position to make demands. I think I am, she said, because Victor doesn't want to fight. He wants me, alive, unharmed, and willing, if possible. Willing's negotiable. Then so is my cooperation, Elizabeth said. You take me now by force, and I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll make a scene. I'll ruin Victor's reputation. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he is. Or I come quietly, no fuss, no drama, and in exchange, you leave Caleb alone. Marcus looked at Caleb, then back at Elizabeth. That's it? That's it? Done. No. Caleb stepped forward. Elizabeth, don't. She finally looked at him. It's okay. It's not okay. You can't. I can, she said softly, and I am. Why? Because I'm tired of running, she said, and because you've done enough. Caleb stared at her, something breaking inside him. This isn't how it's supposed to end. Maybe not, Elizabeth said, but it's how it has to. She turned back to Marcus. Do we have a deal? Marcus nodded. We do. Elizabeth walked toward the horses. Caleb grabbed her arm. Don't do this. I have to. No, you don't. We can fight. We can. And you'll die, she said, looking him in the eye. And I can't let that happen. Elizabeth. She kissed him. It was brief, desperate, and over too fast. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Then she pulled away, climbed onto the horse Marcus offered, and rode off without looking back. Caleb stood in the yard, watching her disappear, the rifle hanging useless at his side. Marcus walked past him. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. No, you're not. Marcus paused. Then he mounted his horse and followed the others. And Caleb was alone again. The cabin felt like a tomb. Caleb stood in the doorway for what might have been minutes or hours, staring at the spot where she'd disappeared. The horses had kicked up snow and now it was settling back down, erasing the tracks, erasing the proof that any of it had happened. He should have fought harder. He should have made her stay inside. He slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. The rifle went back on its hooks. The fire needed stoking, but he left it. He sat down at the table, the same table where they'd eaten together, talked together, made plans that now meant nothing, and he put his head in his hands. She'd surrendered herself to save him. And he'd let her. The worst part was knowing she was right. If they'd fought, he'd be dead. Marcus wouldn't have hesitated. 20 armed men against one man with a rifle. It wasn't bravery, it was suicide. Elizabeth had done the only thing that made sense, but sense didn't make it hurt less. Caleb sat there until the fire burned down to embers and the cabin went cold. Then he got up, walked to the corner where she'd slept, and found the blanket she'd folded that morning. It still smelled like her, soap and wood smoke and something else he couldn't name. He threw it across the room. Then he went outside, saddled his horse, and rode south. The nearest town was a tired collection of buildings that looked like they were one strong wind away from collapsing. Caleb tied his horse outside the saloon and pushed through the door into a wall of noise and smoke. The bartender, a man named Dutch who'd seen more winters than he could count, looked up and frowned. Thought you didn't come down here except for supplies, Dutch said. I need information, Caleb said. About? Victor Kane. The noise in the room died like someone had cut its throat. Every head turned. Dutch's frown deepened. You don't want to go asking questions about that man, Dutch said quietly. I'm asking anyway. Dutch wiped down the bar, slow and deliberate. What do you want to know? Where he is, where he'd take someone he wanted to keep locked up. Why? Caleb leaned forward. Because he took something that doesn't belong to him. Dutch studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. Kane's got a house up north. Big place, built like a fortress. That's where he conducts business when he doesn't want witnesses. How far? 3 days' ride. Maybe 4 in this weather. Dutch paused. You planning on riding up there alone? Yeah. That's suicide. So I've heard. Dutch shook his head. You're a fool, Rourke. Probably, Caleb said. He dropped coins on the bar. But I'm a fool with a direction. He turned to leave, but Dutch called after him. Caleb? He stopped. There's a man 2 towns over, Dutch said. Name's Finn. Used to work for Kane until he didn't. If you're serious about this, you might want to talk to him first. Why? Because he knows how to get inside that house. And if you're going in alone, you're going to need all the help you can get. Caleb nodded once. Then he walked out. Finn lived in a shack that made Caleb's cabin look like a palace. The man who answered the door was maybe 40, with scarred hands and eyes that had seen too much. When Caleb mentioned Victor Kane's name, those eyes went flat. I don't talk about Kane, Finn said. I'm not asking you to talk. I'm asking for a way in. Why? He's got someone I need to get back. Finn laughed, bitter and sharp. You and how many others? Kane doesn't let go of what's his. She's not his. Doesn't matter. Once he decides he owns something, or someone, that's it. You're wasting your time. Then help me waste it properly. Finn stared at him. Then he stepped aside. You got 5 minutes. Inside the shack was sparse. A table, a chair, a bed that had seen better years. Finn poured 2 glasses of something that smelled like kerosene and handed one to Caleb. What do you want to know? Finn asked. How to get inside his house without getting killed. You can't. There has to be a way. Finn drank, wincing. There's a servant's entrance on the east side. Used to be for deliveries, but Kane stopped using it after he caught one of the kitchen staff stealing. Door's still there, though. Locked, but not guarded. Why not? Because no one's stupid enough to try breaking into Victor Kane's house. Until now. Finn almost smiled. You got a death wish or something? Something, Caleb said. Finn set down his glass. Even if you get inside, you won't get far. Kane's got men everywhere, security, guards, people who'd kill you for looking at them wrong. So I'll be quiet. And if you find her, what then? You think you're just going to walk out with her? That's the plan. It's a terrible plan. Got a better one? Finn was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to a corner, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He spread it on the table, a rough sketch of a building, rooms marked and labeled. This is the house, Finn said. Or it was 5 years ago. Things might have changed, but the bones are the same. He pointed to a room on the 2nd floor. This is where Kane keeps people he doesn't want leaving. Private quarters. 1 door, no windows. If she's anywhere, she's there. Caleb studied the map. How do I get to it? Servant's entrance, like I said. Then the back stairs, here. Finn traced a line with his finger. 3rd floor, then down the hall. You'll pass Kane's office. Don't stop, don't look, just keep moving. The room's at the end. And getting out? Same way you came in, if you're lucky. If you're not, Finn shrugged. There's a window at the end of the east hallway. Drops into the gardens, 15-foot fall, maybe more. You'll probably break something. Better than getting shot. Marginally, Caleb folded the map and tucked it into his coat. Why are you helping me? Finn looked away. Because I worked for Kane for 3 years. I saw what he did to people who crossed him. And I saw what he did to people who didn't. He met Caleb's eyes. If you can get someone out of that house, even one person, then maybe it's worth something. Caleb stood. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Finn said. You're probably going to die. Yeah, Caleb said. But at least I'll die trying. The ride north took 4 days. Caleb pushed as hard as he could, stopping only when the horse needed rest. The weather turned nasty halfway through, sleet and wind that cut like knives, but he kept going. He didn't let himself think about what he'd find when he got there, or what would happen if he was too late. He just rode. On the 4th night, he saw the house. It sat on a hill, dark and sprawling, lit by lamps that made it look like something out of a nightmare. Caleb dismounted a mile away, tying his horse to a tree, and approached on foot. The grounds were massive, Manicured gardens, stone walls, gates that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. He circled around to the east side, moving slow and staying low. The servants' entrance was right where Finn said it would be, a plain wooden door set into the stone, half hidden by overgrown ivy. Caleb tried the handle. Locked. He pulled out the knife he'd brought, worked the blade into the gap, and after a tense minute, the lock clicked. The door swung open, silent on well-oiled hinges. Caleb stepped inside. The hallway was narrow and dark, lit by a single lamp at the far end. He moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, his hand on the gun at his hip. Somewhere above, he could hear voices, muffled, indistinct, but enough to remind him that this place was full of people who would kill him without a second thought. He found the back stairs and climbed. The third floor was quieter. The hallway stretched out in front of him, lined with doors, each one identical. Caleb counted them as he passed, matching them to the map in his head. Kane's office was on the left. He could see light under the door, hear the low murmur of conversation inside. He kept walking. At the end of the hall, there was a door with a lock that looked newer than the others. Caleb crouched down, listening. Nothing. He pulled out the knife again, worked the lock. This one took longer. His hands were shaking, and sweat was dripping into his eyes, but eventually it gave. He pushed the door open. The room was small, furnished with a bed, a chair, and a single lamp. And sitting on the bed, staring at the wall like she'd given up on everything, was Elizabeth. She looked up, and for a second, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then her eyes went wide. "Caleb?" "Yeah," he said. "It's me. What are you? How did you?" "Doesn't matter." He crossed the room, grabbed her hand. "We're leaving." "You can't be here," Elizabeth said, her voice rising. "If they find you, they won't." "Caleb, listen to me." "No," he said. "You listen. I didn't ride 4 days through hell just to leave without you. So we can argue about this later, but right now, we're going." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she nodded. They moved fast back down the hall, past Kane's office, down the stairs. Caleb kept expecting someone to appear, to shout, to raise the alarm. But the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. They were halfway across the first floor when the lights came on. "Going somewhere?" Caleb spun around. Victor Kane stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by 6 armed men. He was younger than Caleb expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp features and eyes like broken glass. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Mr. Rourke," Kane said pleasantly. "I was hoping you'd come." Caleb didn't answer. He pushed Elizabeth behind him, hand going to his gun. "I wouldn't," Kane said. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and frankly, outmatched. The only reason you're still breathing is because I'm curious." "About what?" "About why a man would throw his life away for a woman who was never going to be his." "She's not yours either," Caleb said. Kane's smile widened. "Actually, she is. Or she will be, once we're married." "I'm not marrying you," Elizabeth said, stepping out from behind Caleb. "You don't have a choice. There's always a choice." Kane descended the stairs slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "You're wrong. See, I've been very patient with you, Elizabeth. I've given you time. I've given you space. I even let you run, because I knew you'd come back eventually." "I didn't come back. He brought me back." "Semantics." Kane stopped a few feet away. "The point is, you're here now. And you're going to marry me, because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone you've ever cared about suffers." "I don't care about anyone," Elizabeth said. "Liar." Kane's eyes flicked to Caleb. "You care about him." Caleb's hand tightened on the gun. "So here's what's going to happen," Kane continued. "You're going to come upstairs with me. We're going to finalize the arrangements, and your friend here is going to leave, quietly, without making a scene." "And if I don't?" Caleb asked. "Then I'll have my men shoot you where you stand." Caleb looked at Elizabeth. She was shaking, but her jaw was set. "Shoot me," Caleb said. Kane blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Shoot me, because I'm not leaving without her." "Caleb, don't—" Elizabeth started. "He's bluffing," Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Kane. "He wants you willing. He wants you cooperative. And if he kills me in front of you, you'll never forgive him. You'll fight him every day for the rest of your life." Kane's smile faded. "So go ahead," Caleb said. "Shoot me. See what happens." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Kane laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. You're right. I do want her willing, but there are other ways to break people. He snapped his fingers. The men moved forward. Caleb drew his gun, but he wasn't fast enough. Someone grabbed him from behind, wrenching his arm back. The gun clattered to the floor. He fought, throwing an elbow that connected with someone's jaw, but there were too many of them. They forced him to his knees. "Stop!" Elizabeth shouted. "Let him go!" "Or what?" Kane asked. "Or I'll make you regret it." Kane walked over to her, slow and deliberate. "You don't have any leverage here, Elizabeth. You don't have power. You don't have money. You don't have anything." Elizabeth looked at him. Then she said, "I have my name." Kane frowned. "What?" "The Ashford name," Elizabeth said. "It's worth something, isn't it? That's why you want to marry me. Not for me, for what I represent. The connections, the legacy, the respectability." So I'll destroy it," Elizabeth said quietly. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. I'll tell them about the bribes, the threats, the people you've hurt. I'll burn the Ashford name to the ground if it means taking you with it." Kane's expression went cold. "You wouldn't. Try me." They stared at each other. Then Kane turned to the men holding Caleb. "Lock him in the cellar. I'll deal with him later." "No!" Elizabeth lunged forward, but Kane caught her wrist. "You want him alive?" Kane said. "Then you'll do exactly what I say. Understood?" Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I hate you." "I know," Kane said. "But you'll marry me anyway." They dragged Caleb away, and the last thing he saw before the door closed was Elizabeth's face, pale and stricken and helpless. The cellar was cold, dark, and smelled like mold. Caleb sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and tried not to think about how badly he'd failed. He'd come all this way, risked everything. And for what? Elizabeth was still trapped. He was locked up, and Kane had won. Hours passed, maybe days. It was hard to tell in the dark. Then the door opened. A figure stepped inside, carrying a lamp. Caleb tensed, ready to fight, but then he saw the face. Marcus. "Come to gloat?" Caleb asked. "Come to talk," Marcus said. He set the lamp down and sat across from him. "That was a stupid thing you did." "Yeah, I'm full of stupid things." Marcus almost smiled. "You always were." They sat in silence for a moment. "Why are you here?" Caleb asked. "To give you a choice," Marcus said. "Kane wants you gone, dead preferably, but I convinced him to let me handle it." "Handle it how?" "You leave, tonight, quietly, and you never come back." "And if I don't?" "Then I can't help you." Caleb laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think I'm going to run? Leave her here with him? What else can you do?" "I don't know, but I'm not leaving." Marcus sighed. "You're going to get yourself killed. Better than living knowing I abandoned her." "She's not yours to save, Caleb. And she's not yours to sell." Marcus flinched. For the first time, Caleb saw something crack in his brother's face. Guilt, maybe, or shame. "I didn't have a choice," Marcus said quietly. "Everyone has a choice. Not when you've got debts. Not when you've got people depending on you." "So you sold your soul to Victor Kane." "I sold my time," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Marcus looked away. "I don't expect you to understand." "Good, because I don't." They sat there, two brothers who'd become strangers, separated by choices neither of them could take back. Finally, Marcus stood. "I'll leave the door unlocked. What you do after that is your problem." "Why?" "Because you're my brother," Marcus said. "And because maybe you're right. Maybe there are some choices you can't live with." He walked out, and a minute later Caleb heard the sound of the lock clicking open. He waited a few more minutes just to be sure. Then he stood, grabbed the lamp, and climbed the stairs. The house was dark and quiet. Caleb moved carefully, retracing his steps from earlier. He needed a weapon, he needed a plan, and he needed to find Elizabeth before Kane realized he was free. He found a study on the second floor, the door ajar. Inside there was a desk, shelves lined with books, and sitting on the mantel, a revolver. Caleb grabbed it, checked the chamber, loaded. Then he heard voices. He moved to the door, listening. "Don't care what he promised you," Elizabeth was saying, her voice sharp. "I'm not signing anything." "You will," Kane replied. calm and infuriating. Because if you don't, your friend in the cellar dies. You're lying. Am I? There was a pause. Then Kane said, "Bring him up." Caleb's heart sank. He didn't have time to think. He stepped into the hall, gun raised, just as two men started down the stairs toward the cellar. "Stop," Caleb said. They froze. Kane appeared at the top of the stairs, Elizabeth beside him. His hand was on her arm, tight enough to bruise. "Mr. Rourke," Kane said, sounding almost amused, "you're persistent. I'll give you that. Let her go." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Kane smiled. "Go ahead, but the second you do, my men will kill you, and then they'll kill her. Is that what you want?" Caleb didn't lower the gun. "You're not going to kill her. You need her." "I need her signature," Kane corrected. "I don't need her alive to get it." Elizabeth's face went white. "You're bluffing," Caleb said. "Am I?" Kane tightened his grip on Elizabeth's arm. "The truth is, Mr. Rourke, I'm tired of this game. I've been patient. I've been reasonable. And I'm done." He looked at Elizabeth. "Sign the papers, or he dies." "Don't," Caleb said. "Shut up," Kane snapped. Elizabeth looked at Caleb, then at Kane. Then she said, "All right." "Elizabeth, I'll sign," she said. "Just let him go." Kane smiled. "Smart girl." He released her arm and she walked down the stairs past Caleb into the study. Kane followed, and so did Caleb, gun still raised. Inside there was a stack of papers on the desk. Elizabeth picked up a pen, her hand shaking. "This won't change anything," she said. "It changes everything," Kane replied. "Once you sign, the Ashford fortune becomes mine, and you become irrelevant." Elizabeth looked at the papers, then at Caleb, and then she smiled. "You're right," she said. "It does change everything." She signed. Then she tore the papers in half. Kane's face went red. "What are you—" "Those weren't the real documents," Elizabeth said calmly. "Those were copies. The real ones are with my lawyer, locked in a vault, with instructions not to release them under any circumstances." Kane stared at her. "You're lying." "Am I?" Elizabeth met his eyes. "You wanted my fortune. You wanted my name. You wanted to own me. But here's the thing, Victor. You can't own someone who's already given everything away." "What are you talking about?" "I signed over my entire inheritance," Elizabeth said. "Every cent, every property, every stock and bond, all of it, to charity." The room went silent. Kane's face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "I already did, 2 weeks ago, before you even found me. The papers are filed. The transfers are complete. I'm not an heiress anymore, Victor. I'm nobody." Kane lunged at her. Caleb fired. The shot rang out deafening in the small room. Kane stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. You shot me," Kane gasped. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I did." Men poured into the room, guns drawn. Caleb turned, ready to fight, ready to die if he had to. But then Marcus was there, stepping between them. "Enough," Marcus said. "Get out of the way," one of the men snapped. "I said enough." Marcus looked at Kane, bleeding and furious. "It's over, Victor. She's worthless to you now. Let them go." "She destroyed everything, and you brought it on yourself," Marcus said quietly. "You pushed too hard. You took too much. And now you've got nothing." Kane opened his mouth, but no words came out. Marcus turned to Caleb. "Go, now, before I change my mind." Caleb grabbed Elizabeth's hand, and they ran. They made it to the servants' entrance, down the hall, out into the cold night air. Caleb's horse was still where he'd left it, and they rode hard, not looking back, not stopping until the house was miles behind them. When they finally slowed, Elizabeth was shaking so hard she could barely hold on. Caleb pulled the horse to a stop and helped her down. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. They stood there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by snow and silence. "I have nothing left," Elizabeth said quietly. "No money, no home, no name. You have your life. Is that enough?" Caleb looked at her. "You tell me." Elizabeth smiled, small and tired and real. "Yeah, I think it is." They rode until the horse couldn't anymore. When they finally stopped, the sun was coming up, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold that felt wrong given everything that had just happened. Caleb found a cluster of rocks that broke the wind, helped Elizabeth down, and they sat there without speaking while the horse caught its breath. Elizabeth's hands were still shaking. She kept looking back the way they'd come, like she expected to see Kane's men cresting the hill at any moment. "They're not following us," Caleb said. "You don't know that. Marcus won't let them. Why would he help us?" Caleb stared at the horizon. "Because somewhere under all that rot, there's still a piece of the person he used to be. Maybe." Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself. She was still wearing the dress they'd given her at Kane's house. Heavy silk, expensive, completely impractical for riding through the wilderness. It was torn now, stained with dirt and blood that might have been Kane's or might have been hers from where she'd scraped her hands climbing onto the horse. "I can't believe I did it," she said quietly. "Shot Kane? Gave it all away." She laughed, and it sounded a little unhinged. $23 million, gone. Just like that. "You saved your life." "Did I? Or did I just trade one kind of prison for another?" Caleb looked at her. "You're free. That's not a prison." "Free to do what? I don't know how to do anything. I've never worked, never had to worry about money or food or where I'd sleep. I don't even know how to—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I don't know how to survive." "You'll learn." "What if I can't?" "Then you'll fail," Caleb said, "and you'll get up and try again. That's what everyone does." Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why did you come for me?" "Because you asked me not to let them take you." "I didn't ask." "You didn't have to." She looked at him, something raw and uncertain in her expression. "I don't understand you." "Nothing to understand. You needed help. I helped." "People don't do that, not for strangers." "You're not a stranger," Caleb said. "Not anymore." Elizabeth opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it. She pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on them, and stared at nothing. After a while, Caleb stood. "We should keep moving. Put more distance between us and that house." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." "Where's that?" He didn't have an answer. They rode for 2 more days, stopping only when they had to. Caleb kept them off the main roads, sticking to game trails and creek beds where the snow was thin enough to hide their tracks. Elizabeth didn't complain, even though he could see she was exhausted. She just held on and kept going. On the 3rd day, they reached a town Caleb had been to once, years ago. It wasn't much, a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads, but it had a general store and a boarding house that didn't ask questions. Caleb paid for a room with the last of his money, got Elizabeth settled, and went to find food. When he came back, she was asleep on top of the blankets, still fully dressed, like she'd sat down and just collapsed. Caleb set the bread and cheese on the table, pulled a chair over to the window, and kept watch. She slept for 14 hours. When she finally woke, it was late afternoon. She sat up slowly, wincing, and looked around like she'd forgotten where she was. "How long was I out?" she asked. "Long enough. You should have woken me." "You needed the rest." Elizabeth stood, stretched, walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A few people passed by, bundled against the cold, but no one looked twice at the boarding house. "What happens now?" she asked. "We figure out what's next." "I meant what happens to you. You can't go back to your cabin. Kane knows where it is. His men could be waiting." Caleb had thought about that. "Yeah, probably." "So you lost your home because of me?" "I lost a building. That's not the same thing." "Caleb, it's fine," he said, more sharply than he meant to. "I'll find another place." Elizabeth turned to look at him. "You're angry." "I'm tired." "You're angry that I gave the money away." Caleb stood, walked to the other side of the room. "I don't care about the money." "Then what?" "I care that you didn't tell me," he said. "We spent weeks planning, and you never mentioned that you'd already signed everything over. You let me think we still had options." "We did have options. We had lies." Elizabeth flinched. "I couldn't tell you." "Why not?" "Because you would have tried to stop me." "Damn right I would have." "And that's exactly why I didn't say anything," she said. "You think I wanted to give it all away? You think it was easy? That was my father's legacy, everything he built, and I destroyed it. To save yourself." "To spite Kane," she corrected. "There's a difference." Caleb stared at her. You did it out of spite? Partly. Is that so wrong? It's stupid. Maybe, but it worked. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the silence stretching between them like a wound. Finally, Caleb said, "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know." "You need a plan." "I need a lot of things. A plan isn't one of them." "Elizabeth, stop," she said quietly. "Just stop. I know you're trying to help. I know you think I need to figure everything out right now, but I can't. I'm barely holding it together as it is." Caleb looked at her, really looked. She was pale, thinner than when he'd first found her, with bruises under her eyes that sleep hadn't erased. She looked like someone who'd been running so long she'd forgotten how to stop. "All right," he said. "No plans. Not yet." Elizabeth nodded, then sat down on the edge of the bed. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. They stayed in the boarding house for 3 more days. Caleb spent most of his time watching the street, waiting for trouble that didn't come. Elizabeth stayed in the room, reading books she borrowed from the landlady, and staring out the window like she was trying to memorize the view. On the 4th morning, Caleb woke to find her dressed and packing the few things they'd managed to scrounge together. "Where are you going?" he asked. "We," she corrected. "Where are we going?" "I didn't say I was going anywhere." "You didn't have to." Elizabeth tied the bundle closed. "You've been watching that street like you're expecting an army to show up. You're not staying here any more than I am." She was right. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since they'd arrived, and every time someone walked past the window, his hand went to the gun he kept within reach. "So where are we going?" he asked. "East." "That's where you came from." "Exactly. Kane thinks I'll run west. Everyone runs west, but I'm going back, to the city, to the lawyers who handled my father's estate." Caleb frowned. "Why?" "Because I need to know if what I did actually worked. I need to see the paperwork, confirm that the transfers went through, and if they didn't—" She stopped. "If they didn't, then I need to fix it before Kane finds out. That's a long way to go for paperwork. It's a long way to go for peace of mind." Caleb thought about arguing, but he could see from the set of her jaw that she'd already made up her mind. "All right, east it is." They left before noon, bought passage on a freight wagon heading to the nearest rail line. The driver didn't ask questions, just took Caleb's money and pointed them to the back. They sat among crates and barrels, wrapped in blankets that smelled like mildew, and watched the town disappear behind them. The journey took 2 weeks. They rode trains that rattled and swayed, slept in stations that were barely more than sheds, and ate whatever they could afford. Elizabeth never complained. She just kept moving forward, 1 mile at a time, like she was afraid that if she stopped, she'd lose her nerve. Caleb watched her change during those weeks. The brittleness that had clung to her since Kane's house started to fade, replaced by something harder, more resolved. She stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped flinching at loud noises, started asking questions about the places they passed through, the people they met, the world she'd never really seen before. "I've been to Europe twice," she said one night, while they waited for a connection in a depot that was mostly just a platform and a ticket booth. "Paris, London, Vienna, but I've never been to half the states in my own country." "You didn't miss much." "I missed everything," she said. "I was so busy being who my father wanted me to be, I never stopped to figure out who I actually was." "You know now?" "No, but I'm starting to." When they finally reached the city, it hit Caleb like a wall. He'd been to cities before, but not like this. This was noise and smoke and crowds that pressed in from all sides. Buildings that stretched toward the sky, blocking out the sun. Streets packed with carriages and people and vendors shouting over each other. Elizabeth navigated it like she'd been born to it. She led him through the chaos without hesitation, turning down streets he couldn't tell apart, until they reached a building with brass plates by the door and windows that gleamed. "This is it," she said. Inside, the law office was all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of place that smelled like money and old paper. A clerk looked up when they walked in, took in their travel-stained clothes and dirt-streaked faces, and frowned. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Mr. Harrington," Elizabeth said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll see me." The clerk's frown deepened. I'm afraid that's not. Tell him Elizabeth Ashford is here, she said. He'll see me. The clerk hesitated, then disappeared into a back room. A minute later, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes came out, stopped dead, and stared. Miss Ashford, he said. We thought you were dead? Elizabeth finished. I'm not. Can we talk? Harrington ushered them into his office, closed the door, and poured 3 glasses of brandy with shaking hands. Where have you been? We've had investigators searching for months. Your uncles claimed you'd been kidnapped. There were rumors you'd fled the country. We didn't know what to believe. Believe that I'm here now, Elizabeth said. And I need to know if the documents I sent you were filed. Harrington set down his glass. The transfer documents? Yes. They were filed 3 weeks ago. Everything was processed exactly as you instructed. Elizabeth closed her eyes. It's done then. The money's gone. Not gone, Harrington said carefully. Transferred to the charitable trust you established. The foundation will continue your father's work, funding schools and hospitals, and I don't need the details, Elizabeth said. I just need to know that Victor Kane can't touch it. He can't. No one can. The trust is irrevocable. Elizabeth sagged in her chair like someone had cut her strings. Thank you. Harrington looked between her and Caleb, clearly trying to piece together what had happened. Miss Ashford, there's something you should know. Your uncles have been difficult. They're claiming the transfer was made under duress. They're trying to have it overturned. Can they? Not if you testify that it was your decision, but if you don't appear, if you remain missing, they might find a judge sympathetic to their cause. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, When's the hearing? 2 weeks. Then I'll be there. Elizabeth, Caleb said quietly, that's not safe. I know. Kane will be there. Your uncles. Everyone who wants you dead or controlled. I know, she said again. But if I don't show up, everything I did was for nothing. The money goes back into probate. Kane gets another chance, and I'll spend the rest of my life running. You could still run. I'm tired of running. Caleb looked at Harrington. Can you protect her? I can request a security detail for the courthouse, but beyond that, he spread his hands. I'm a lawyer, not a bodyguard. Then we'll need more than lawyers, Caleb said. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared. Harrington arranged for Elizabeth to stay in a hotel under a false name, somewhere Kane and her uncles wouldn't think to look. Caleb stayed with her, sleeping on the floor by the door, gun always within reach. During the day, they met with Harrington and his associates, going over testimony, reviewing documents, preparing for every argument her uncles might throw at them. At night, they barely spoke. The tension was too thick, the stakes too high. 3 days before the hearing, Elizabeth broke. Caleb came back to the room to find her sitting on the floor, papers scattered around her, crying so hard she could barely breathe. He crouched down beside her. What happened? I can't do this, she gasped. I thought I could, but I can't. I'm going to walk into that courtroom and they're going to destroy me. They'll twist everything, make it look like I'm unstable or incompetent or... Hey, Caleb said, gripping her shoulders. Look at me. She did, her face blotchy and wet. You're the strongest person I know, he said. You walked away from a fortune. You stood up to Kane. You survived things that would have broken most people. You can do this. What if I can't? Then you'll fail, and we'll figure out what comes next. You keep saying that, because it's true. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. Why are you still here? Where else would I be? Anywhere. You could have left a dozen times, gone back to your life. What life? Caleb asked. The cabin's probably burned down by now. I've got no money, no property, no prospects. I'm just as lost as you are. Then why stay? He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, Because I want to. Elizabeth stared at him. Then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like salt from her tears. Caleb froze for a second, surprised, then kissed her back. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. I shouldn't have done that, Elizabeth said. Probably not. I'm a mess. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want. That makes 2 of us. She laughed, shaky and small. What are we doing, Caleb? I don't know, but I'm not sorry. Me neither. They sat there on the floor, surrounded by papers and uncertainty, holding on to each other like it was the only thing that made sense. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray. Elizabeth dressed in the one good dress Harrington's wife had loaned her. Simple, dark, respectable. Caleb wore the only clean shirt he had left. They didn't talk much on the way to the courthouse. There wasn't anything left to say. The courtroom was already packed when they arrived. Journalists in the back rows, curious onlookers filling the gallery. And at the front, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits, sat Elizabeth's uncles. They looked older than Caleb expected, softer, but their eyes were hard when they saw Elizabeth walk in. Victor Kane was there too, sitting 3 rows back. His arm was in a sling, and when his gaze landed on Caleb, his expression went cold. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The hearing began. Elizabeth's uncles went first. Their lawyer was smooth, practiced, painting a picture of a grieving young woman who'd made rash decisions while emotionally compromised. He talked about the Ashford legacy, the responsibility that came with such wealth, the tragedy of seeing it squandered. Miss Ashford was not in her right mind, the lawyer argued. She'd just lost her father. She was being pursued by parties with questionable motives. Under such duress, how can we trust that her decision to dissolve the estate was truly her own? Then it was Harrington's turn. He was older, less flashy, but when he spoke, the room listened. My client was of sound mind when she made her decision, Harrington said. She consulted with me extensively. She understood the implications, and she chose of her own free will to honor her father's true legacy, not by hoarding wealth, but by using it to help others. The judge asked questions, documents were presented, witnesses were called, and then the judge said, "I'd like to hear from Miss Ashford herself." Elizabeth stood. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The questioning started gentle. Harrington asked about her father, her relationship with him, the conversations they'd had about the future of the estate. Elizabeth answered calmly, clearly, without hesitation. Then her uncle's lawyer stood. "Miss Ashford," he said pleasantly, "can you tell us where you've been for the past several months?" "I was staying with a friend." "And where was that?" "In the mountains, west of here." "Quite remote, I imagine. Cut off from society, from legal counsel." "I had everything I needed." The lawyer smiled. "Did you also have access to Mr. Victor Kane during this time?" Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "No. But Mr. Kane has stated under oath that you were staying at his residence as his guest." "He's lying." "Can you prove that? Can he prove I was there willingly?" The lawyer's smile widened. "Were you at Mr. Kane's residence at any point in the last 3 months?" Elizabeth hesitated. "Yes." "And how long did you stay?" 2 days. "And during that time, did Mr. Kane make any threats against you?" "Yes." "What kind of threats?" "He said he'd kill the man who helped me if I didn't cooperate." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. The lawyer waited for silence. Then he said, "And yet you're here. The man you're referring to," he gestured at Caleb, "he's alive. So either Mr. Kane didn't follow through on his threat, or you're exaggerating the danger you were in." "I'm not exaggerating anything." "Then why are you here, Miss Ashford? If you were truly in such danger, why return to the very city where your enemies reside?" Elizabeth looked at the lawyer, then at her uncles, then at Kane. "Because I'm done being afraid," she said. The lawyer blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm done running, done hiding, done letting people like you and my uncles and Victor Kane dictate what I do with my life." Elizabeth stood straighter. "You want to know why I gave away my inheritance? Because it was mine to give, not yours, not theirs. Mine. And I chose to do something good with it instead of watching it get torn apart by people who only cared about the money." "Miss Ashford." "I'm not finished," she said. "My father built that fortune from nothing. He worked until his hands bled and his back broke. And when he died, he left it to me because he trusted me to do the right thing. Not the profitable thing, not the easy thing, the right thing." She looked at the judge. "I gave that money away because it was the only way to keep it from being destroyed by greed. And I'd do it again. I don't regret it. I'm not sorry, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me I was wrong." The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Harrington, do you have any further witnesses?" "No, Your Honor." "Then I'll render my decision." The judge looked at the papers in front of him, then at Elizabeth. "Miss Ashford, I find that you were of sound mind when you made your decision. The transfer stands. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Elizabeth closed her eyes. It was over. The courtroom emptied slowly, people filing out in clusters, their voices low and speculative. Elizabeth stayed in her seat, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. Caleb watched her from the back row, waiting to see if she'd fall apart now that it was done. She didn't. After a few minutes, she stood, smoothed her borrowed dress, and walked toward the exit. Caleb fell into step beside her, and they made it halfway down the corridor before someone called her name. Elizabeth. She stopped, turned. One of her uncles stood there, the younger one, Thomas, with thinning hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His lawyer hovered behind him, but Thomas waved the man away. "I need a moment," Thomas said. Elizabeth's expression went flat. "I don't have anything to say to you. Please, just 1 minute." Caleb stepped closer, but Elizabeth held up a hand. "It's fine." Thomas looked at Caleb, then back at his niece. "I wanted to apologize." Elizabeth laughed, sharp and bitter. "For what? Trying to steal my inheritance? Siding with Cain? Calling me incompetent in open court?" "For all of it." Thomas rubbed his face. "I was angry when your father left everything to you. I thought it should have gone to family, to us. We built that business with him, worked alongside him for years, and then he left it to someone he trusted," Elizabeth finished. "Not someone who felt entitled to it." Thomas flinched. "You're right. I was entitled, bitter. And when Cain approached me with his proposal, I saw an opportunity to get what I thought I deserved. I didn't think about what it would cost you." "No, you didn't." "I'm sorry." Elizabeth studied him. "Are you? Or are you just sorry you lost?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Both, probably. But that doesn't make the apology less real." "It doesn't make it matter, either." "I know." Thomas glanced at Caleb again. "Is this the man Cain was talking about? The one who helped you?" "Yes." "Thank you," Thomas said, directing the words at Caleb, "for keeping her safe when we didn't." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice not to say something he'd regret. Thomas turned back to Elizabeth. "I know you don't owe me anything, but if there's ever a time when you need help, family help—" "I won't," Elizabeth said. "I don't need you. I don't need any of you." She walked away and Caleb followed. They made it outside before she started shaking. Caleb guided her to a bench at the edge of the courthouse steps, sat her down, and waited while she fought to get herself under control. Her breathing was ragged, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. "I thought I'd feel better," she said finally. "I thought winning would make it all worth it. Does it?" "I don't know. I just feel empty." Caleb sat beside her. "That's normal." "How would you know?" "Because I felt the same way after I left home. After I cut ties with Marcus and everyone else. I thought I'd feel free, relieved. But mostly, I just felt alone." Elizabeth looked at him. "Do you still feel that way?" "Sometimes. Less than I used to. Because of me." "Yeah." She leaned against him and he put his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, watching people come and go, neither of them ready to move yet. Eventually Harrington found them. "Miss Ashford," he said, slightly out of breath, "I've been looking for you. There are reporters." "I'm not talking to reporters. They're going to write about you whether you talk to them or not." "Let them. I don't care what they say." Harrington hesitated. "There's something else." Cain left the courthouse through the back entrance. He had words with one of the journalists, threatened a lawsuit if they printed anything that made him look like the aggressor. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. Of course he did. The journalist told him to go to hell. A small smile tugged at Elizabeth's mouth. "Good." Harrington shifted his weight. "There's one more thing. The trust, the charitable foundation you established, needs a board of directors. I was hoping you'd consider serving as chairwoman." Elizabeth shook her head. "No. Miss Ashford, I gave that money away so I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. Putting me in charge defeats the purpose." "But your father's legacy will survive without me," Elizabeth said firmly. "Find someone else, someone who actually knows what they're doing." Harrington looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elizabeth's expression stopped him. As you wish. I'll draw up the necessary paperwork. Thank you for everything. Harrington nodded, then left them alone again. Caleb waited until the lawyer was out of earshot before saying, "You sure about that?" "About what?" "Walking away from the foundation. It's still your father's work." "My father's work was building something from nothing," Elizabeth said. "I'm doing the same thing, just in a different way." "What way?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." They stayed in the city for another week. Harrington insisted on tying up loose ends, paperwork to sign, statements to give, legal formalities that made Caleb's head spin. Elizabeth handled it all with a patience he didn't know she had, sitting through meetings that lasted hours, answering the same questions over and over. At night, they went back to the hotel and collapsed. On the fifth night, Elizabeth said, "I want to leave." Caleb looked up from the chair by the window. "Where do you want to go?" "Anywhere. Nowhere. I don't care, I just can't stay here anymore." "All right. Just like that?" "You want to leave? We leave." Elizabeth smiled, tired but real. "What did I do to deserve you?" "Nearly died in the snow." "Right, that." They left 2 days later before dawn, slipping out of the hotel while the city was still sleeping. Caleb bought train tickets heading west, and they sat in a third-class car with hard wooden seats and windows that rattled every time the train picked up speed. Elizabeth stared out the window, watching the city fade into countryside, then into wilderness. She didn't look back. "Do you miss it?" Caleb asked after a few hours. "The city?" "The life, the money, everything you gave up." Elizabeth thought about it. Sometimes. Not the money itself, but what it represented. Security, options, the ability to fix problems by throwing resources at them. And now? Now I have to actually solve problems instead of buying my way out of them. She looked at him. "It's terrifying." "You'll get used to it." "Will I?" "You got used to living in a cabin with no running water." "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Caleb said. "You just don't always like the options." The train carried them west for 3 days. They changed lines twice, slept sitting up, and ate bread and cheese they bought from vendors at the stations. Elizabeth never complained. She just kept moving forward, 1 mile at a time. On the 4th day, Caleb noticed they were being followed. It started as a feeling, the prickle on the back of his neck that came from years of living alone, staying alert. He glanced around the train car, cataloging faces, looking for anything out of place. There. 3 rows back. A man in a dark coat, hat pulled low, watching them. Caleb leaned over and whispered to Elizabeth, "Don't turn around. But we've got company." Her hand tightened on the seat. "Who?" "Don't know, but he's been on every train we've taken since we left the city." "Kane? Maybe. Or your uncle's, or someone else entirely." Elizabeth's face went pale. "What do we do?" "We get off at the next stop. Lose him in the crowd." The next station was small, barely more than a platform and a ticket booth. They grabbed their things and stepped off as casually as they could manage, blending into the handful of other passengers disembarking. Caleb kept Elizabeth close, guiding her toward the street. The man in the dark coat followed. Caleb cursed under his breath. "Keep walking." "Where are we going?" "I don't know. Just move." They turned down a side street, then another, weaving through the town. The man stayed with them, always a few yards back, never closing the distance, but never falling behind. Finally, Caleb pulled Elizabeth into an alley, pressed her against the wall, and drew his gun. "Stay here," he said. "Caleb, stay." He stepped back out onto the street just as the man rounded the corner. Caleb leveled the gun. "That's far enough." The man stopped, raised his hands. "Easy." "Who are you?" "My name's Porter. I'm a journalist." Caleb didn't lower the gun. "Why are you following us?" "Because you're a story. Elizabeth Ashford gives away a fortune, disappears for months, shows up at a courthouse with a mysterious stranger, wins her case, and then vanishes again. People want to know what happens next." "Nothing happens next. We're done." Porter smiled. "You're never done. Not when you're that interesting." "I'm not interesting. I'm armed. Leave us alone." "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want an interview." "No." "I'll pay." "No." Porter lowered his hand slowly. "Look, I get it. You want privacy, but the story's already out there. Other reporters are looking for you too. I'm just the first one who found you. Caleb glanced back at the alley. Elizabeth was watching, her face tight with fear. If I give you an interview, Caleb said slowly, will you leave us alone? I'll do my best, but I can't speak for everyone else. Then what good are you? Porter shrugged. I can write the story in a way that makes people lose interest, paint you as boring, normal, not worth chasing. And what do you want in exchange? The truth, just once. On the record. Caleb lowered the gun. 5 minutes. That's all you get. They sat in a diner at the edge of town, Elizabeth and Caleb on one side of the booth, Porter on the other. The journalist pulled out a notebook and a pencil, flipped to a clean page, and looked at Elizabeth. Why did you do it? He asked. Give it all away, I mean. Most people would have fought to keep it. Most people didn't have Victor Kane trying to own them, Elizabeth said. Fair point. But you could have fought him, hired lawyers, used your wealth to protect yourself. I tried that, it didn't work. So you gave it away out of spite. I gave it away to be free. Porter wrote that down. And now? What's next for Elizabeth Ashford? There is no Elizabeth Ashford anymore, she said. That person died when I signed those papers. Now I'm just Elizabeth. And what does just Elizabeth plan to do? She looked at Caleb. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Porter turned to Caleb. What about you? Who are you in all this? Nobody. Come on. You broke into Victor Kane's house, shot him, helped a woman walk away from $23 million. That's not nobody. It's also not a story. Everything's a story if you tell it right. Caleb leaned forward. Here's the story. A man found a woman dying in the snow. He saved her life. She saved his. The end. That's all there is. Porter studied him. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. The journalist closed his notebook. All right, I'll write it your way. Boring, forgettable, nobody worth chasing. Thank you, Elizabeth said quietly. Porter stood, dropped a few coins on the table for his coffee. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Not many people would have the guts to walk away from that kind of money. Not many people had a reason to. Porter tipped his hat and left. Elizabeth slumped in her seat. Do you think he'll keep his word? No idea, but it doesn't matter. We'll keep moving either way. For how long? Until it's safe. And when will that be? Caleb didn't have an answer. They kept moving west, changing trains every few days, never staying anywhere long enough to be remembered. Elizabeth cut her hair short in a town whose name Caleb forgot an hour after they left. She bought plain clothes, trousers, work shirts, a coat that had seen better days. She looked less like an heiress and more like someone who'd been traveling hard. Caleb liked her better this way. 3 weeks after they'd left the city, they reached a settlement at the edge of the mountains. It was small, rough, and far enough from civilization that nobody asked questions. They rented a room above a general store, and for the first time since the courthouse, they stopped running. That night, Elizabeth sat by the window, staring out at the stars. I keep waiting for it to catch up with me, she said. What? The fear, the panic, the feeling that I made a terrible mistake. Has it? Not yet, but I keep thinking it will. Caleb sat down beside her. You did the right thing. How do you know? Because you're still here, still fighting. That's all that matters. Elizabeth leaned her head against his shoulder. What happens when we run out of places to run to? We stop running. And then? Then we build something new. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think I'd like that. The next morning, Caleb woke to find Elizabeth already dressed and packing. Where are we going? He asked. Nowhere. I'm going to town to find work. Work? I need money. We both do. Unless you've got a secret fortune hidden somewhere. Not exactly. Then I'm finding work. She pulled on her coat. You coming? Caleb got dressed and followed her downstairs. The town didn't have much in the way of employment, but Elizabeth was persistent. She asked at the general store, the saloon, the boarding house. Most people turned her away. They didn't have work for strangers, didn't trust outsiders, didn't want the trouble. But the woman who ran the boarding house, a widow named Mrs. Garrett, looked Elizabeth up and down and said, You ever done laundry? Not professionally. But you know how? Yes. Good enough. I need someone to help with the washing. Pays not much, but it includes a meal. Elizabeth took it. Caleb found work a day later helping at the livery stable. The pay was worse than the laundry job, but it was something. They fell into a routine. Up before dawn, work all day, collapse at night. It was hard, repetitive, and nothing like the life Elizabeth had known. But she didn't complain. She just kept going. 2 months passed, then 3. The fear Elizabeth had been waiting for never came. Instead, something else crept in, something quieter, more sustainable. She started to relax, started to smile more, started to look less like someone who was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Caleb watched her change, bit by bit, and realized he was changing too. The anger that had lived in him for years, the resentment, the bitterness, the sense that he'd been dealt a bad hand, started to fade. He still didn't have much, still lived day to day, but it didn't feel like a punishment anymore. It felt like a choice. One night, they were sitting outside the boarding house watching the sunset when Elizabeth said, "I've been thinking." About? About what comes next. I thought you didn't like plans. I don't, but I think I'm ready to stop running. Caleb looked at her. What do you want to do? I want to stay here. Find a place of our own. Build something. With what money? We'll save, work, figure it out. She turned to face him. I know it won't be easy. I know I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to try. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. You're serious? Yes. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I get to choose what I want, and I choose this. I choose you. Caleb didn't know what to say, so he kissed her instead. When they pulled apart, Elizabeth was smiling. Is that a yes? Yeah, Caleb said. It's a yes. But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be that simple, because 2 days later, Victor Kane found them. Caleb was at the livery stable, mucking out stalls, when he heard the horses. He looked up to see 3 riders coming down the street, moving with the kind of purpose that meant trouble. Kane was in front. Caleb dropped the pitchfork and ran. He found Elizabeth at the boarding house, carrying a basket of laundry. He grabbed her arm, pulled her inside. What's wrong? She asked. Kane's here. Her face went white. How? Doesn't matter. We need to leave, now. They grabbed what little they had and headed for the back door. But when Caleb opened it, Kane was standing there, flanked by his men. Going somewhere? Kane asked. Caleb pushed Elizabeth behind him. Leave us alone. I would. But you shot me. That tends to stick with a person. You'll live. I know, but you won't. Kane nodded to his men. Take them. The men moved forward. Caleb reached for his gun, but it wasn't there. He'd left it in the room upstairs. He swore, stepped back, tried to think of a way out. Then someone fired a shot. Everyone froze. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, rifle in hand, aimed at Kane's chest. That's far enough, Marcus said. Kane stared at him. What are you doing? Stopping you from making a mistake. This isn't your concern. It is now. Marcus glanced at Caleb. Get out of here, both of you. Marcus, Caleb started. Go! Caleb grabbed Elizabeth's hand and ran. They didn't stop until they were miles outside of town, hidden in the trees, gasping for breath. What just happened? Elizabeth asked. I don't know. Why would your brother help us? I don't know that either. They waited in the trees until dark, then circled back toward town, staying off the road. When they reached the boarding house, it was empty. Kane and his men were gone. So was Marcus. Caleb found a note pinned to the door of their room. It said, You were right. There are some choices you can't live with. Get as far away from here as you can. Don't come back. It wasn't signed, but Caleb knew Marcus's handwriting. He showed the note to Elizabeth. What does it mean? She asked. It means we're out of time, Caleb said. Kane's not going to stop, and next time Marcus might not be there to help. So what do we do? Caleb folded the note, tucked it into his pocket. We finish this. How? By making sure Kane can't come after you anymore. Elizabeth frowned. What are you talking about? You gave away your money to protect yourself, but it didn't work, because Kane doesn't just want your fortune. He wants to own you. So we take away the only leverage he has left. Which is? Your silence. Elizabeth stared at him. You want me to go public, tell everyone what he did, not just what he did to you, what he's been doing for years, the bribes, the threats, the people he's hurt, all of it. He'll destroy me. He'll try. But if you tell the truth loud enough and public enough, he won't be able to hide anymore. That's insane. Yeah, but it's the only way this ends. Elizabeth looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "All right, let's do it." They went back to the city. It was the last place Caleb wanted to be, and he could tell Elizabeth felt the same way. But if they were going to expose Kane, they needed an audience. They needed newspapers, lawyers, people who could amplify her voice loud enough that Kane couldn't silence it. The train ride felt longer this time. Elizabeth stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, and Caleb could see her working through what came next. The fear, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that this plan would fail and leave them worse off than before. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do. We could still run, find somewhere so remote even Kane couldn't find us." Elizabeth turned to look at him. "And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, never knowing when he'd show up, never being able to settle anywhere? It's better than being dead." "Is it?" She reached for his hand. "I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of running. Tired of being afraid. If I have to face him one more time to make it stop, then that's what I'll do." Caleb squeezed her hand. "Then I'm with you. Even if it goes badly?" "Especially then." When they arrived in the city, they went straight to Harrington's office. The lawyer looked up from his desk, startled, then stood so quickly his chair tipped over. "Miss Ashford, Mr. Rourke, I thought you'd left for good." "We did," Elizabeth said, "but we're back, and I need your help." Harrington righted his chair, gestured for them to sit. "What kind of help?" "The kind that ends with Victor Kane in prison." The lawyer's expression shifted from surprise to something more cautious. "That's a tall order. Kane has resources, connections, the best lawyers money can buy." "I know, but he's also a criminal, and I can prove it." Harrington sat down slowly. "What exactly are we talking about?" Elizabeth laid it out. The bribes Kane had paid to secure rail contracts, the threats he'd made to competitors who wouldn't sell to him, the people who'd disappeared after crossing him, workers who'd tried to organize, journalists who'd written unfavorable articles, business partners who'd refused his terms. She didn't have hard evidence for all of it, but she had names, dates, details she'd overheard during her time at his house. When she finished, Harrington was quiet for a long moment. "This is dangerous," he said finally. "If you go public with accusations like these, Kane will come after you with everything he has. He'll call you a liar. He'll drag your name through the mud. He'll make your life hell." "He's already done that," Elizabeth said. "At least this way I'm fighting back." "And if you lose?" "Then I lose. But I'll have tried." Harrington studied her. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll help. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just make accusations. We need documentation, witnesses, a case strong enough that the authorities can't ignore it." "How do we get that?" "We start with the people Kane hurt, the ones who are still alive and willing to talk. If we can get even a few of them to testify, it might be enough to trigger an investigation. And if they won't talk, then we'll find another way." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked. Harrington compiled a list of names, people who'd had dealings with Kane, people who'd been wronged, people who might be willing to speak up. Caleb and Elizabeth visited them one by one, sitting in cramped apartments and shabby offices, listening to stories that made Caleb's blood boil. A factory foreman who'd been beaten for trying to improve safety conditions. A widow whose husband had died in a suspicious accident after refusing to sell his land. A journalist who'd been run out of town after publishing an article about Kane's business practices. Some of them refused to talk. Too scared. Too broken. Too convinced that nothing would change. But some agreed. Slowly, painfully, they built a case. Elizabeth wrote it all down. Every story, every detail, every piece of evidence they could gather. She worked late into the night, her handwriting cramped and smudged, filling page after page with the truth about Victor Kane. Caleb watched her and realized something he'd been trying not to think about. She was stronger than she knew, stronger than he'd given her credit for. She'd gone from a woman who didn't know how to survive on her own to someone who was taking on one of the most powerful men in the country. And she was doing it even though she was terrified. On the 15th day, Harrington called them into his office. "I've spoken with a contact at the district attorney's office," he said. "They're willing to hear what we have. But they want to meet with Elizabeth directly. They need to assess her credibility. When? Elizabeth asked. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Elizabeth nodded. I'll be there. That night she barely slept. Caleb could hear her moving around the room, pacing, sitting by the window, lying down only to get up again a few minutes later. You should rest, he said finally. I can't. You need to be sharp tomorrow. I know. But every time I close my eyes, I see Kane. I hear his voice. I remember what it felt like to be trapped in that house, knowing he could do whatever he wanted and no one would stop him. Caleb sat up. He doesn't own you anymore. Doesn't he? He's still out there, still powerful, still untouchable. Not for long. Elizabeth looked at him. What if this doesn't work? What if they don't believe me? Then we try something else. Like what? I don't know, but we don't stop. Not until he can't hurt anyone else. She came over to the bed, sat down beside him. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. Why? Because the alternative is giving up, and I don't think you know how to do that. Elizabeth smiled, small and tired. I'm learning from you. Then you're learning wrong. I gave up a long time ago. No, you didn't. You're here, aren't you? Caleb didn't have an answer for that. The meeting with the district attorney was held in a building that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Elizabeth sat across from a man named Caldwell, who had gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Harrington sat beside her. Caleb waited outside. Caldwell listened while Elizabeth told her story. He didn't interrupt, didn't take notes, just listened with his hands folded on the desk in front of him. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. These are serious accusations, he said finally. I know. Do you have proof? I have witnesses, people Kane hurt, people willing to testify. Witnesses can be unreliable, especially when they're going up against someone with Kane's resources. Are you saying you won't help? I'm saying I need more than stories. I need documents, financial records, something concrete that ties Kane to the crimes you're describing. Elizabeth's hands tightened in her lap. I don't have that. Then I can't help you. So that's it? Kane gets away with it because he's too rich to prosecute? Caldwell's expression didn't change. I didn't say that. I said I need more evidence. If you can get it, bring it to me. Until then, my hands are tied. Elizabeth stood. Thank you for your time. She walked out without looking back. Caleb caught up with her on the street. What did he say? He needs evidence we don't have. So what do we do? Elizabeth stopped walking. We get it. How? By going back to Kane's house. Caleb stared at her. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's the only way. Elizabeth, in his office. That's where he keeps his records. I saw them when I was there. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence, everything. If we can get in, get what we need, and get out, we'll get caught. Or killed. Or both. Probably, Elizabeth said. But I'm out of options. Caleb looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she stood like she was ready to go to war. And he realized she was serious. All right, he said, we'll do it. But we do it smart. We plan. We prepare. And if anything goes wrong, we run. Agreed. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Caleb went back to Finn, the man who'd given him the map of Kane's house. Finn listened to the plan, shook his head, and said, You're insane. So I've been told. You won't make it past the front gate. We're not going through the front gate. Finn sighed, then pulled out the old map again. All right, here's what you need to know. He walked them through the layout, pointing out guard rotations, weak points in the security, places where they could hide if things went wrong. He also told them about Kane's office, where it was, how to get in, what kind of safe he used. It's a combination lock, Finn said. Old model. If you know what you're doing, you can crack it in under a minute. Do you know what you're doing? Caleb asked. I used to, but my hands aren't steady enough anymore. Can you teach me? Finn looked at him, then he nodded. Yeah, I can try. They spent hours practicing on a safe Finn had in his shack. Caleb fumbled at first, his fingers too clumsy, his patience too thin. But eventually, he got the hang of it. The click of the tumblers, the feel of the mechanism, the way the lock gave when you hit the right combination. On the third night, he cracked it in 45 seconds. Finn clapped him on the shoulder. You'll do. Elizabeth, meanwhile, worked with Harrington to identify exactly what they needed. Financial records showing payments to officials, correspondence proving Kane had threatened or bribed competitors, anything that could tie him directly to a crime. You'll have maybe 10 minutes in that office, Harrington warned. You need to know exactly what you're looking for. I'll know it when I see it, Elizabeth said. That's not good enough. It'll have to be. The night they chose was cold and moonless. Caleb and Elizabeth approached Kane's house from the east, the same way Caleb had the first time. The grounds were quiet, the guards following the same patterns Finn had described. They slipped through the servants' entrance, moved up the back stairs, and reached the third floor without incident. Kane's office was at the end of the hall, the door unlocked. Too easy, Caleb thought, but they didn't have time to second guess. Inside, the office was exactly as Finn had described. A massive desk, bookshelves lining the walls, and against the far wall, a safe. Caleb knelt in front of it, pressing his ear to the metal, turning the dial slowly. Elizabeth stood by the door, keeping watch. The first tumbler clicked, then the second. Then, find what you're looking for? Caleb spun around. Kane stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand. Behind him, 3 of his men. I have to say, Kane said, almost pleasantly, I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come back. Caleb stood slowly, hands raised. Let her go. This is between you and me. No, Kane said. This is between me and her. You're just a complication. He looked at Elizabeth. I gave you a chance, multiple chances. I was willing to forgive everything if you'd just cooperate. But you couldn't do that, could you? You wanted to own me, Elizabeth said. I'd rather die. That can be arranged. Kane raised the gun. Caleb moved without thinking, stepping between them. You want to shoot someone? Shoot me, Kane smiled. Gladly. The gunshot was deafening in the small room. Caleb braced for the impact, but it didn't come. Instead, Kane staggered, blood spreading across his shoulder. He looked down, confused, then looked up. Marcus stood in the hallway, rifle still raised. I told you to leave them alone, Marcus said. Kane's face twisted with rage. You're finished. Do you understand that? When this gets out, it's already out, Marcus said. He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat and tossed it onto the desk. The headline read, Victor Kane under investigation for bribery and extortion. Kane's face went white. What did you do? What I should have done years ago, Marcus said. I went to the authorities, gave them everything I had, documents, testimony, proof of every crime you've committed since I started working for you. You betrayed me. No, Marcus said. I stopped being complicit. Kane lunged forward, but his men didn't follow. They just stood there, hands away from their weapons, watching. You're not going to help him? Kane shouted. One of the men shrugged. We're not getting paid enough for this. Kane turned back to Marcus, his face contorted with fury. You'll regret this. Maybe, Marcus said, but I'll sleep better. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Police officers appeared, weapons drawn. They moved into the room surrounding Kane. Victor Kane, one of them said, you're under arrest. Kane didn't resist. He just stood there, blood dripping from his shoulder, staring at Elizabeth with an expression that was equal parts hatred and disbelief. As they led him away, he said, This isn't over. Yeah, Elizabeth said quietly. It is. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses testified. Documents were presented. The newspapers covered every minute of it, printing stories that painted Kane not as a powerful industrialist, but as a criminal who'd built his empire on the backs of people he'd hurt. Elizabeth testified for 2 days. She told the court everything, the threats, the violence, the way Kane had tried to control her life. She spoke clearly, calmly, without flinching. When the prosecution asked why she'd given away her fortune, she said, "Because I realized something. Money doesn't make you powerful. It just makes you a target. Real power comes from being free." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the verdict was guilty on all count. Kane was sentenced to 20 years. Elizabeth sat in the courtroom, listening to the sentence, and felt something inside her finally let go. The fear, the anger, the weight she'd been carrying since the day her father died. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Elizabeth pushed through without answering questions, Caleb at her side. They made it to the street, hailed a cab, and didn't speak until they were back at the hotel. Inside, Elizabeth sat down on the bed and started crying. Not sad tears, not relieved tears, just tears. Like her body didn't know what else to do with everything she was feeling. Caleb sat beside her, pulled her close, and let her cry. "It's done," she said finally, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "It's really done." "Yeah, it is." "What do we do now?" "Whatever we want." Elizabeth pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I don't know what I want." "Then we'll figure it out." "How?" "Same way we've been doing. One day at a time." They stayed in the city for another week, tying up loose ends. Harrington helped Elizabeth sort through the legal aftermath of Kane's conviction. Marcus stopped by once, awkward and uncertain, to check on them. "I'm leaving the city," he said. "Starting over somewhere else. Figured I owed you that much. To let you know." "Where are you going?" Caleb asked. "Don't know yet. Somewhere quiet." "Good luck." Marcus hesitated. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have stood up to him sooner." "You stood up when it mattered," Caleb said. "That's enough." Marcus nodded. Then he left, and Caleb never saw him again. On their last day in the city, Elizabeth and Caleb walked through the financial district, past the buildings that had once represented her father's empire. She stopped in front of one, a tall structure with the Ashford name carved into the stone above the entrance. "They'll probably change the name," she said, "now that I'm not part of it anymore." "Does that bother you?" "No, it's just strange. That was my whole life, and now it's just a building." "It was always just a building." Elizabeth smiled. "I guess so." They left the city the next day. This time they didn't run. They just traveled, taking trains when they felt like it, walking when they didn't, stopping in towns that looked interesting and moving on when they got bored. They worked odd jobs. Caleb chopped wood, fixed fences, did whatever needed doing. Elizabeth took whatever she could find, washing, cooking, cleaning. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. 3 months later, they found a piece of land for sale in a valley surrounded by mountains. It wasn't much, just 20 acres with a creek running through it, and a view that went on forever. "What do you think?" Caleb asked. Elizabeth looked at the land, at the mountains, at the sky that seemed bigger than anything she'd ever known. "I think it's perfect." They bought it with money they'd saved, every cent earned through work that left them tired and sore and strangely satisfied. They built a cabin, small, simple, nothing fancy. It took them all summer, and the roof leaked in 3 places, but it was theirs. That first night, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I've been thinking," Elizabeth said. "About what?" "About what my father would say if he could see me now. Living in a cabin I built with my own hands, working for wages. No servants, no luxury. Nothing he worked his whole life to give me. Would he be disappointed?" Elizabeth thought about it. "No. I think he'd be proud." "Why?" "Because he didn't build his fortune so I could live off it. He built it so I'd know what was possible, so I'd understand what it takes to create something from nothing." She looked at Caleb. "And that's what we're doing, creating something from nothing. Is it enough?" "More than enough." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek, watching the stars come out. "You know what I realized?" Elizabeth said. "What?" "I spent my whole life being told who I was supposed to be. The heiress, the daughter, the prize someone like Kane could win, but I was never just Elizabeth, just me. And now? Now I get to figure out who that is." Caleb reached for her hand. "For what it's worth, I like who you're becoming. Even though I'm terrible at building roofs? Especially because of that." Elizabeth laughed. "What about you? Are you who you want to be?" Caleb thought about it. "I spent a long time thinking I didn't want to be anything, that the point of living out here was to avoid being anything. But I was wrong." "About what?" "About thinking isolation was the same as freedom. I thought if I kept everyone out, I'd be safe, but I was just alone. And now? Now I'm not alone. And that's better." They stayed on that land for a year, then another, building something that felt less like survival and more like a life. They planted a garden that mostly failed the first year and did better the second. They got chickens that refused to lay eggs in winter. They fixed the roof, dug a well, added a room when they realized they needed more space. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the work felt endless, days when the isolation pressed in and they snapped at each other over nothing. Days when Elizabeth still woke up from nightmares about Cain and Caleb had to remind her that she was safe. But there were good days too. Days when the garden actually produced something edible. Days when they sat by the fire and talked until midnight. Days when they woke up early just to watch the sunrise. And slowly, those good days started to outnumber the bad ones. 2 years after they'd settled, a letter arrived. It was from Harrington, forwarded through 3 different post offices before finding them. Inside was a single page. "Miss Ashford," it read, "I thought you'd want to know that the Ashford Foundation, the charitable trust you established, has completed its first major project. They've built a school in the district where your father grew up. It will serve 200 children who otherwise wouldn't have access to education. Your father would be proud. I hope you are too. Respectfully, J. Harrington." Elizabeth read the letter twice, then handed it to Caleb. "That's your legacy," he said. "No," Elizabeth said. "That's my father's legacy. Mine is this." She gestured at the cabin, the land, the life they'd built. "This is what I chose. This is who I am. And are you happy?" Elizabeth thought about it. Not the automatic response she would have given a year ago or 2 years ago, but really thought about it. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think I am." Caleb smiled. "Good. What about you?" "I'm getting there." "Just getting there?" "It's a process." Elizabeth laughed. "Fair enough." That night, as they lay in bed, Elizabeth said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" "Sometimes." "And?" "I'd probably still be in that cabin, alone, angry, waiting for something to happen that never would." "Do you miss it, the quiet?" "No, I thought I wanted quiet, but what I really wanted was peace. And I've got that now." Elizabeth rolled over to face him. "Because of me?" "Because of us." She kissed him, slow and gentle. "I love you." Caleb froze. She'd never said it before. Neither of them had. "I know I should have said it sooner," Elizabeth continued, "but I was scared. Scared that if I admitted how much you meant to me, it would all fall apart. But I'm done being scared." Caleb pulled her closer. "I love you too." "Yeah?" "Yeah." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Years passed. The cabin grew. So did the garden. They got a horse, then 2. They started selling vegetables at the nearest town, making enough to get by and a little extra besides. Elizabeth learned to bake bread that didn't come out like a brick. Caleb learned to fix things he'd never thought he'd need to know about. They both learned that building a life was harder than either of them had expected, and more rewarding too. One spring morning, 5 years after they'd bought the land, Elizabeth stood on the porch with her hands on her swollen belly, watching Caleb work in the field. He looked up, saw her watching, and waved. She waved back. In a few months, there would be 3 of them. A child who would grow up knowing nothing about fortunes or empires or men like Victor Cain. A child who would learn to work with their hands, to build things, to make choices based on what mattered instead of what looked good. Elizabeth put a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick, and smiled. She'd given away everything, her name, her fortune, her old life, and somehow ended up with more than she'd ever had. Not more money, not more power, just more life. And that, she realized, was the whole point. Because wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in mornings like this, standing on a porch she'd helped build, watching the man she loved work the land they owned together, carrying a child they'd made, living a life they'd chosen. She had no title, no inheritance, no protection except what they created for themselves. And she had never been richer. Caleb finished what he was doing and walked back to the cabin. He climbed the steps, kissed her forehead, and put his hand over hers on her belly. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than all right." "The baby?" "Active today." Caleb smiled. "Takes after you." "Or you." "Let's hope not. One stubborn person in this family is enough." Elizabeth laughed. "Too late for that." They stood there together, looking out at the land they'd built from nothing. The garden, green and thriving. The barn they'd raised last summer. The fence line Caleb had just finished repairing. It wasn't much by the standards Elizabeth had grown up with, but by the standards that mattered, it was everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Giving it all away?" Elizabeth thought about the question, really thought about it. Then she said, "No, not for a second." "Why not?" "Because I learned something important." "What's that?" "That you can't buy freedom. You can't inherit it. You can't marry into it. The only way to get it is to take it. And sometimes taking it means letting go of everything else." Caleb pulled her close. "That's a hell of a lesson." "Yeah, but it was worth learning." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the valley, burning off the morning mist. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. The creek bubbled over stones. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. And for the first time in her life, Elizabeth felt completely, utterly, perfectly free. Not because she had money, not because she had power, not because someone had given her permission, but because she'd chosen this life, fought for it, built it with her own hands. And no one, not Cain, not her uncles, not anyone, could ever take that away from her. Caleb squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything, nothing. How strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing." "What was the worst thing?" "Almost dying in the snow." "And the best?" Elizabeth looked at him. "You finding me?" Caleb smiled. "I was going to say the same thing." They went inside together, leaving the door open so the morning air could follow them in. The cabin smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The light slanted through the windows, golden and warm. Elizabeth made breakfast while Caleb tended the fire. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who knew without asking what the other needed. After they ate, Caleb said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "About the baby. What we're going to tell them when they're old enough to understand." "About what?" "About you, about where you came from, about everything you gave up." Elizabeth set down her fork. "What do you think we should tell them?" "The truth, that their mother walked away from a fortune because she wanted something more important." "And what was that?" "A life worth living." Elizabeth reached across the table, took his hand. "That's exactly what I want them to know. Not that I was rich, not that I gave it all away, but that I chose this, that I chose you, that I chose us." "They're going to have questions. Let them. We'll answer them honestly." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. I don't want them growing up thinking life is easy or fair or that good things just happen. I want them to know that you have to fight for what matters, that sometimes the right choice is the hardest one, that freedom is worth more than gold." Caleb smiled. "You've got it all figured out." "Not even close. But I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." They cleaned up together, then went outside to work. Elizabeth in the garden, Caleb on the fence. The sun climbed higher. The day grew warm. And as Elizabeth knelt in the dirt, planting seeds that would grow into food they'd eat come fall, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The scared woman who'd fled into the snow. The desperate girl who'd traded everything for a chance at freedom. The person she'd been and the person she'd become. She wasn't the same anymore. That old Elizabeth, polished, refined, trapped, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew how to work, how to survive, how to build something real. Someone who'd learned that the only wealth worth having was the kind you couldn't lose. Not money in a vault, not property in your name, but the life you built, the people you loved, the choices you made when everything else was stripped away. That was the real fortune, and Elizabeth had it in abundance. When the sun started to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold, they stopped working and sat together on the porch. Elizabeth leaned against Caleb, his arm around her shoulders, both of them tired in the way that came from a day well spent. "I've been thinking," Elizabeth said. "Seems to be going around." She smiled. "I want to write it down, everything that happened, from the beginning to now." "Why?" "So the baby knows. So when they ask where we came from, we have something to show them. Not just the story, but the truth behind it." "You think they'll care?" "I think they'll want to understand why their parents live the way we do, why we work so hard for so little, why we chose this over everything else." "And what will you tell them?" "That some things are worth more than money, that freedom matters, That love is real, even when everything else falls apart. She looked at him. That their father saved my life, and I saved his right back. Caleb kissed the top of her head. Write it down then. I'll help if you want. I want. So she did. Over the next few months, while her belly grew and the baby kicked, and the seasons changed, Elizabeth wrote. She filled notebooks with the story of a woman who'd had everything and gave it all away, of a man who'd been hiding from the world until someone needed saving, of the journey they'd taken together from that first day in the snow to this moment on the porch. She didn't make it pretty, didn't soften the edges or leave out the ugly parts. She wrote about the fear, the mistakes, the times they'd almost given up, because that was real. That was honest. And she wanted their child to know that real things were hard, and hard things were worth doing. When she finished, she read it to Caleb. He listened without interrupting, and when she was done, he said, That's good, really good. You think so? Yeah, it's honest, and it's us. Elizabeth closed the notebook. Do you think they'll understand? Eventually, maybe not right away, but eventually. What if they think we were stupid, giving up all that money? Then we'll tell them the truth, that we weren't stupid. We were free. Elizabeth nodded. That's good. I like that. The baby came in early autumn, when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air had that crisp edge that promised winter. The birth was long and difficult, and there was a moment when Caleb thought he might lose her. But Elizabeth was stronger than the pain, stronger than the fear, and when the baby finally came, crying and perfect, she looked at Caleb and smiled. A girl, the midwife said, placing the baby in Elizabeth's arms. Elizabeth looked down at her daughter, tiny, red-faced, furious at being born, and felt something shift in her chest. A new kind of love. Fierce and terrifying and absolute. What are we going to call her? Caleb asked. Elizabeth thought about it, about her father, about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained, about the life they were giving this child and the legacy that mattered. Grace, she said. Her name is Grace. Why Grace? Because that's what we've been given. A second chance. A new life. Grace. Caleb looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the family they'd become. Grace Rourke, I like it. So do I. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, together, in the cabin they'd built with their own hands. Outside, the world kept turning, but inside, they had everything that mattered. Love, safety, freedom, a fortune that couldn't be measured, stolen, or destroyed. And as Elizabeth held her daughter close, feeling the weight of her, the warmth, the absolute realness of this tiny person who would grow up knowing what it meant to be free, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The snow, the cabin, the choice to give it all away, every hard decision, every impossible moment, every time she'd wanted to quit and didn't. It had all been worth it, every single bit, because this right here, this family, this life, was the real treasure. And unlike money or power or all the things the world said mattered, this was something that would last. This was forever.